What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. And we are going to dive into a very, very interesting video that I saw on the Danny Jones podcast, an interview of Thomas Campbell. And Thomas Campbell, if you guys are unfamiliar, he is a pretty famous physicist known for his work on consciousness and his My Big Toe, the theory of everything model, which posits that reality is a conscious information-based simulation. His career includes a PhD in physics, long tenure in U.S. missile defense research and development, and work as a contractor for NASA. Before his work in defense, he worked as a systems analyst in the U.S. Army Technical Intelligence. His education, he holds a BS and MS in physics and earned a PhD in experimental nuclear physics from University of Virginia. This guy obviously has amazing credentials in terms of the things that he's worked on. And I wanted to shine a light on this first before we dive into the video, because he's going to say some things that you're going to wonder, what is he talking about? Some people automatically go to that place of, nah, he's making stuff up. He's just trying to get clicks, because why hasn't this been studied at a major university? Why isn't this on the news? And I think one thing that I want to start off with right off the bat in this video is try to calm that response to some extent. Just listen with an open mind and an open heart, and don't let all of the expectations that society has built in our minds of like, okay, if this is true, then it should be on this platform and in this university and whatnot. Because I think if you're tuning into this channel, I think you've come to realize that that's definitely not always the case for myriad reasons. Sometimes financial, sometimes for particular companies to maintain a particular stance in the eyes of the public, so the other information doesn't want to get shared. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons and rationales why things that folks are saying don't get prime time play in the media, don't get the center stage in university research. Okay, so just bear this in mind. But to me, this guy is extremely credible, and what's very fascinating is the way that he describes God and what happens when we die. Actually, it all lines up with things that I've read thus far in Journey of Souls and Memories from the Afterlife and other NDE experiences. And it's very interesting, but he describes it with a different vernacular or a different vocabulary, because of course this guy's a physicist. So he's describing things according to his perception of the world and his research in his lifetime as a physicist, working for NASA, working for the military, etc. But a lot of the key critical components match up. So I thought it was very interesting. Another totally different type of perspective other than just NDEs from folks with a non-scientific background. So we're going to jump into two clips in particular. The first one is Danny Jones actually asked him to talk about the consciousness system and asked him very, very point blank, is this God, this larger consciousness system? So listen to what he has to say in response to that question, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about what he says here.
So this larger consciousness that you speak of, that we all come from, is this God?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I never looked at it that way. It just turned out I was just following the logic of how consciousness evolved, and it ended up with this larger consciousness system. And about, 10, 15 years ago, I was giving a talk in the basement of a church, because that's a very cheap venue. And it was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had two PhD theologians there, was the minister and the assistant minister, and the idea just hit me. So I stopped what I was saying. I was telling people sort of things I've told you. I was telling people a larger conscious system and so on. And I asked them, I said, well, you two are theologians, right? And they said, yes. And I said, tell me, what are the characteristics of God? Now, I don't want dogma. I just want the fundamental characteristics. What are the attributes of God in general? And they did. They went and huddled and came back about 10 minutes later, and here was their list, and they had about 6, 7 things on there that was the attributes of God. Every one of them was an attribute of the larger consciousness system. And when I didn't expect that. I thought maybe 1 or 2 or 3 might be, but all of them were. And after that, I started thinking about it. Well, this model has also derived God. What is God? Where does it come from? Well, it's the larger consciousness system. It's the source of everything. Oh, yes, we are created in its image. We're little pieces that are the same piece of consciousness with memory and processing and whatever. We're virtual machines inside the larger machine, and it all kind of fell together. That's what most people talk about when they talk about.
It's interesting because he describes it in a very scientific manner, talking about us being virtual machines or us being fragments of this larger consciousness system. But when other folks talk about it, they talk about it the exact same way, but instead God is the source. I think if we're taking it out of a lot of the mainstream religions, God, especially folks from these NDE experiences, God is the absolute source of all. We derive from God, which he's describing as the larger consciousness system. And folks often say that we are fragments of that same energy and consciousness. It flows through us and we can connect back to it. And he's essentially saying the same thing. So I just thought this was so interesting. And again, to me, in my opinion, this guy, credentials aside, but obviously, if you consider the credentials, he's even that much more, in my opinion, believable and credible. But even credentials aside, I feel like what he's saying and what he's describing, because it matches up with many other things that I've read and heard from various accounts, I feel like he's describing it accurately. And I just think it's really cool that from a scientific perspective, just trying to understand what's really going on with our existence, why we're here, where we come from, where we're going to go after we pass on. He's sort of framing it in the same way. And that's his point. When he even talks to theologians, they're essentially saying the same thing with a different set of vocabulary. Now we get to the really important clip here, at least for my video and for the purposes of my channel, talking about what happens when we pass on the purpose of life, the purpose of why we're here. And he talks about getting somewhat of an understanding of knowing where we go when we die based on his ability to travel out of his body and do something called remote viewing. So remote viewing is obviously something that I've heard many, many times just because of my varied interests. And this is basically the principle of being able to, I guess, exit your body to some extent, a piece of your consciousness, and go around and view things that are not in your vicinity. You could, there's stories of, again, this is now, we're getting into some conspiracy stuff, but there are folks that have said that remote viewing is something that was trained and practiced by members of the CIA to gather intelligence or whatever. But anyways, that's something that we can dive into in greater detail at a later point. Again, I'm not the expert on remote viewing, but I know what it is. And he talks about it with his military experience. He said he's able to remote view as well and attach his consciousness to another soul or another energy form. And when they pass out of the body, he calls it an avatar. He's able to go along with them. And through these experiences, he's able to confirm that when we pass out of our bodies, we go somewhere. And then from there, we go somewhere else. He's going to talk about that here. And again, what's very interesting is many of the things that he says here matches up with accounts and testimonies from Journey of Souls and memories from the afterlife. Check this out.
What happens when we die?
That's an easy question. I know that's the hard question, but that's really the easy question. And first, let me tell you how I know, because how do you know what happens when you die? Well, I know from several approaches. One, it's easy to do a mind-to-mind connection with somebody and then just follow along with them. So you see, hear, smell, and taste what they see, hear, smell, and taste. And it's just a mind-to-mind connection. What was it? Spock used to do that with the fingers on the head, right? He'd do a mind meld. Well, it's kind of like that, but not quite so showy.
You're tapping into somebody else.
You attach it into somebody else's mind. So you're just an observer. You're sitting there observing what they're doing.
Right.
And I've done that 2 or 3 times with people as they died.
Wow.
And you can just attach to them, and then you can go with them and see where it goes. And then you go through.
You were there while they died.
Yeah. You just attach to their consciousness. It's what you're attaching to, their consciousness. The body dies, the consciousness doesn't. So when they die, you're with their consciousness, and you can follow that process that they go through. And that's one way that I learned. The other way was that a long, long time ago, the larger conscious system gave me a job in the virtual reality frame I call the transition reality. And that's where you end up after your avatar dies. And it's there for a transition. And I was there just to learn what was like. I was like a Walmart greeter. You know, the people would die and they would come there, and I would say, "Yeah, come up this way. It's fine. Everything's going to be all right." And I was doing that for a while, and I got around to the various places and stations, and so I spent probably, I don't know, months where every night I had entities come to me when I was very young, like 7 years old. They taught me how to go out of body, and they taught me a lot of other things too, how to get around in the non-physical. So I had all that happen to me at a young age. And I had, you know, non-physical friends forever. And I still do. Some of the ones I interacted with when I was 7, I still interact with them. So that's been a constant. But anyway, the system sent me to this transition reality so that I would understand what happens when you die.
Now, I want to say something really quick. You guys might be listening and say, well, this guy is saying he has non-physical entities. He must be crazy. This is wild. What is he talking about? But I will say, it's like what he's talking about in terms of the non-physical entities. It's again a vocabulary thing. Other folks talk about it as their guides, people that they're communicating with that you can't physically see. So I'm just saying there's other accounts. He's just describing it with a different set of vocabulary. And then when he talks about the transition room, this transition area, it's very interesting the vocabulary is describing it with, because this is also talked about in the Journey of Souls, is that there are people that usually come to greet, especially younger souls, newer souls that are less experienced and less aware of, you know, kind of more. It's a bigger shock to their system when they have their first several incarnations or whatever, and they leave their body. Again, this is just what's discussed in Journey of Souls, that they need somebody to help them transition from that back to the source, back to where they're going, back to the ethereal plane. And so when he describes it, it might sound totally out of the blue, but again, this is corroborated in those two books where they do these. It's basically a bunch of different cases of people that go through hypnosis therapy and then are able to recall these different, I guess you could say, ethereal memories. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you're listening to this, you're like, what is this guy talking about? There's actually a lot of other folks have said essentially the very same thing, just with different terminology.
And I worked there for probably a month. Every night I'd lie down, and as soon as I hit the bed and shut my eye, I was gone, and I was there. And I did that every night until I learned everything that was there. So I've seen it from the death and the process and the transition, and then I've seen it from the other side where that transition comes to the transition reality and goes through the process of finding another avatar and going back.
So
for
it's
another
sort of
experience.
like the idea of reincarnation. So our consciousness gets shuttled into another avatar.
Yeah.
And born, like when a baby is born, does it enter?
Doesn't have to be when it's born. It can be, mostly it is before. Once the baby has sensory organs, it can see, it can hear, it can smell, it can taste, then that's when a consciousness can go there and see, hear, smell, and taste those things from those sensory.
It's very interesting. And the thing that he mentions there, the reason why I included that portion is because, again, this is described as well in the Journey of Souls, where they basically say they talk about how, I guess, whatever you want to call it, the soul, the energy forms, they usually come in and inhabit the body of, I guess, a baby. It's not right at the embryonic stage, but it's months after, at a certain point. And they also talk about how he doesn't mention this, but at that point when they come in, they're able to leave the body and come back, and that often happens a lot during the gestation period. So anyways, I just thought it was very interesting that all of that matched up, even though he's using a totally different type of vocabulary, talking about all these things within a scientific context. But this also brings us back to a larger point. One of the fundamental points of this channel is that there should be no bright line division between science and religion. That, I think, is a construct that is just run amok in our society. At the end of the day, it's a scientific question, because it's a question of it's just a question of reality. What happens after our physical bodies die? And you see here, he's trying to approach that question. And it's almost like when you talk about theology and then the word science comes in, it's almost like science is a dirty word. Again, just science is we're just a quest for truth. And that's what it's all about. And the two, obviously, they 100% overlap while they're the same. It's the same. Theology is an aim to explain beyond the scope of what we, where we go beyond this life. Okay. That's the idea. Science it's not as though it just automatically should stop right at the end of life in the physical universe. It's just a question of everything and understanding how all things work together. So again, I think scientific pursuit of answering this question done the right way, I think is exactly what we should be doing by trying to leverage all the various resources and accounts that we can regarding this topic, because there's a lot out there. And it's the overlaps. It's the fact that so many things match up from different accounts that is very persuasive to me. Now, again, if you're looking for that, oh, well, now this university or that university is now studying this concept in detail and they're doing actual research. I just don't believe that's going to happen for a number of reasons. And I won't go into that today, but all I will say is if you're out there trying to also learn like I am with an open mind and an open heart, just be open-minded and try it to the best of your ability. At least this is what I'm trying to do. And I feel like it's been really fruitful for me so far, is just try to listen honestly and openly and use your own judgment. Does it sound like this guy is manufacturing this out of thin air? And for what reason? For what purpose? I do think that most people on this planet want to tell the truth and just want to spread messages of reality. I think most people feel gross just making stuff up and spreading falsities. So I tend to try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I feel like this guy's really credible, and I'm just putting it out there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you find this persuasive? Do you find it interesting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.